Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm here tonight with Nick Gauthier, who is running for the Connecticut Assembly, 38th District. Again this year, he ran and lost in a very close race 2 years ago, and is trying again. So we thought we'd have him on the show to talk about what's happening in Waterford and all the election issues. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be back.
Yeah, well, this I think is actually the first candidate-related show we've done in 2024. So
I'm honored.
you're number one on that. I guess you can start out. I first became aware of you running in a primary for state rep many years ago. So you've been involved in it for a long time. So do you want to talk a little bit about your involvement in Waterford politics? Sure. And, what's motivated you to do this?
Yes. So, hello. I'm Nick Gauthier. I am running for state representative in the 38th District, which does cover Waterford, but also Montville as well.
And this show also covers Waterford and Montville, so.
Yeah, great. As you said, this is my second time running. I'll be on the November ballot. I anticipate to be. 2 years ago in 2022, I ran for this position and I got 49% of the vote. It was about a 200 vote difference between me and the longtime incumbent, Republican incumbent. But as you said, I've been involved in much longer than that. I first got elected to the Waterford town office, to what we have is an RTM, the representative town meeting. Most people can think of it as town council.
Yeah, actually it's closer to direct democracy than a lot of our towns have.
Yes. So I first got elected to that in 2019, and then it's every 2 years, so 19, 21, and 23. So I just got reelected a couple of months ago. And in every election that I've run in, I've actually done better than the previous time. And what's really important to me and what I really focus on is, my background is an organizer, certainly a political organizer, but also a labor organizer. And so what's really important to me is going door to door, person to person, and having one-on-one conversations with people who I, seek to represent and work for once I'm in office.
So you're starting early enough that you can knock on a whole lot of doors between now and early November.
Absolutely.
And I last time you were on the show, you were collecting signatures to bring a referendum to Waterford.
Correct.
Under really adverse circumstances. And I recall that you were spending like every day collecting signatures for a few weeks.
Yeah, so it was a referendum for us to move away from natural gas use and fossil fuel use in town buildings for the town of Waterford. And of course, protecting our environment against climate change is still a top issue for me. And yes, the way referendum processes work at the town level, or at least in Waterford, is after a vote of the RTM, then any elector in the town has a period of 15 days to collect the 5% signatures of 5% of all registered voters in the town, which is a pretty high bar. And if you are limited to only that 15-day period. So it was difficult, but we did organize it and we did win. In my time in elected office, I've honestly treated it very similar to as I engaged in politics before I was in elected office, as an organizer, as an activist, as an advocate, and really bringing people into the process to advocate for themselves as well.
It's so interesting to me. I did live in Waterford for about 15, 16 years when we first moved to Connecticut, and never really got very involved in the politics there at all. But you know, in a way, your process for bringing things to referendum is quite similar to New London's. You know, after an action is taken, you can petition, gather signatures. The threshold in New London's calculated a little differently. I think it's 10% of the number of people who voted in the last election.
Yeah, I may be a little off on that. It
Well,
may
I
be
think-
5% of the previous elections.
Yeah, although it seemed as though you had to
Registered
collect really a
voters.
whole lot of signatures.
It was a lot, regardless of
It
how
was-
it's calculated. I knew it was a lot.
But you know, our referenda, I know there's a very high threshold of participation needed in your referenda in Waterford. You know, a lot of people have to vote. In New London, we've had sort of the opposite problem that, like, fewer than 1,000 people go to the polls, and they can overturn what council did with like 550 votes, which
Yeah.
is not. That way seems a little too easy. Waterford seems a little too hard.
Sure. But that's, again, why it's so important to me to bring people into the process as early as possible on any number of issues, whether it's environmental policy or, you know, something as simple as, say, universal school meals. You know, if I were to get elected, when I get elected to this state office, again, I intend to operate in a very similar way to not lose that touch and not lose that connection with people in my district, my neighbors, and make other legislators have to take a stance on really important issues, and do that by organizing my constituents and people who support those issues.
Now, you mentioned school lunches, and you recently had an opinion piece in the paper about school lunches. You know, being in New London has had universal school lunches. Oh gosh, they already had it when I was on the Board of Ed in 2009, so probably close to 20 years New London has had it. It's been extremely successful.
Yeah, well, we all had it from the federal level for 2 full school years. And that's something that after that federal funding went away, several states around the country, including Massachusetts, passed it at the state level and guaranteed it universally at the state level. And in fact, Massachusetts went so far as to amend their own state constitution to guarantee funding and support for the universal school meals in perpetuity, written into their constitution. And I know if people remember 2 years ago, we, on our ballot for the midterm elections 2 years ago, we had a yes or no question of, do you want to start early voting? Well, in Massachusetts, they had what's called the Fair Share Amendment, which, among other things, guaranteed universal meals, written and amended their constitution by the same process we can do it here.
We can. Well, I think a lot of towns are kind of grappling with, you know, we had COVID funds. There was extra state money, extra federal money coming to the towns for a few years. And now we have not the same fights, but similar, related fights for different, kinds of resources that we had, you know, the advantage of for a few years. And now the funding from the higher entity is drying up, and we have to decide whether we want to pay for it. So, yeah, New London already has universal feeding, but they're at risk of losing some, like, positions for wellness staff.
Well, yeah. So
It-
again, looking at it from the state level, because I am running for the state office, I can talk about local as well.
Sure.
But one of the giant problems right now is what's called the fiscal guardrails. And right now in the state of Connecticut, we had those couple of years of federal support and pandemic funding, which have now gone away. But as they're going away, those needs are still there. The needs have not gone away. The support that people need, especially when things and just life in general costs more. But these fiscal guardrails means that even though we as the state of Connecticut, I believe, have more than $3 billion
We have a
of
ton of
surplus,
surplus.
a lot of the money cannot be used in regular budgeting process because of these really restrictive guardrails. And it just makes absolutely no sense. And a giant problem in what you're talking about is that there's all these different sectors with a lot of really important needs, from housing to public education to food costs to healthcare costs. And because we are artificially limiting how we can use our own resources, these are funds that have already been taxed and collected from people who pay taxes in our state, right? All these needs are existing out there, but we're telling public schools to compete against, seniors who are struggling to afford to retire and stay in their homes. And that makes no sense.
You're the second person this week, well, maybe it was 8 days ago, who's talked about the fiscal guardrails and the impact.
Yes.
Because, you mentioned healthcare, and I guess in the previous session, some fixes to Husky C were passed.
Sure.
Right now, as opposed to the other Huskies, Husky C has very low income guidelines and especially very low asset limits.
Correct.
For qualification. And a partial fix was passed last session, a year ago, and it's not going to be implemented because the fiscal guardrails will not allow the money to be budgeted.
Correct.
So, we could probably, come up with several examples around the state of really important projects that aren't happening, even though we have plenty of money to cover them because of the fiscal guardrails. And I don't know. I don't know what the rationale is. Maybe maybe people in Greenwich get it. I don't.
Well, a lot of the rationale, and I was there fighting against it when it was originally put in place, I believe around 2017. I think some of the rationale was, hey, we want to look good to Wall Street, so we want to have a lot of extra money that we can't use, that we're taxing from Connecticut taxpayers, and then sit in a bank account and not used, because that will make Wall Street happy. That'll make our investors happy.
Yeah, we'll get good loan ratings, good,
But not even necessarily that. So it's just very frustrating where you have needs, you have the solution to those needs, and we have artificially built a barrier between providing those solutions to those needs.
And there's way too much of that in general, not just with the fiscal guardrails. You read a lot about the housing crisis. I've heard about people who are working with, unhoused folks and saying they've never seen so many older people who have never been homeless in their life now struggling. And there are more empty houses than there are people who need houses. And we just can't figure out how to match it up.
Well, in the country overall, that might be true. But in our region, and certainly in my district, there's almost no available housing. And certainly if you're, a younger professional and you're trying to look for a place maybe to rent before buying as well, that's a near impossibility. And what is available to rent is very high-end,
It's-
very expensive.
Well, we have that high-end thing in New London too, and of course we're in the SCTV studio, and there are at least 1,000 units going up right next door of high-end rental housing in Waterford.
Correct, but it's not anywhere close to affordable.
And we have that, also in New London along Howard Street and proposed in Fort Trumbull. And I know people who work at EB who are engineers. They might even be management if they have families, and they can't just live in the studio. They say they can't even afford the apartments. I'm not sure I really don't know who's going to live in them all.
Well, again, in some instances, the owners, the builders, profit and benefit regardless of whether someone lives there or not.
Right.
These are often used as investment vehicles. Housing is becoming more of a speculative market, and just kind of trading and selling and buying and selling like any other, commodity market. And for me, for instance, there's a situation in Groton right now where there is a real estate company backed by venture funds out of, I believe, Brooklyn, that just bought up several apartment units in Groton, and within 30 days, they're saying all the tenants need to vacate, need to move out, even though there's no indication that they're, late on their rent or anything. Again, they just bought this place, and they're saying within 30 days, no matter what, get out. And so that's where lawmakers need to step in and pass regulations for tenants, for people who need a roof over their head. That's what housing needs to be. We need housing first policy that regulates against private interest, real estate companies who are just seeking to make a profit, just buying up our housing stock to use for their own individual benefit. And then, as you said, we do have housing sometimes. We have people in housing in this situation in Groton, and they're being kicked out so that this company can make, a higher profit.
I think I had read that there were some states, or maybe not states, but municipalities, I'm not sure which,
Both.
that have regulations stating that if a landlord puts his building on the market, the tenants need to have the right of first refusal. And I think that would be a really fascinating way to go if some of these apartment buildings became co-ops.
Absolutely.
Current renter become co-owners, and we don't have that at all, and we have just the situation where housing, like healthcare, like many other human needs, has become a commodity rather than a need.
Yes, and you said that's exactly how I've talked about it as well. But the terminology you use, which is, a human need, a human right. People need a roof over their head. They need food. They need education. These are basic human needs and basic human rights. Healthcare, they need to be able to see their doctor when they're sick. And when you have a basic human need or a basic human right, you cannot treat it like any other consumer commodity. It's not like buying a brand new high-end TV. And if you want to have the free market, quote unquote, in play when it comes to buying consumer commodities like a new TV, and of course some people will be priced out of that market and can't afford a new TV.
Yeah, they won't die though.
Then that's one thing, yes. But if you apply that same exact model and that same exact thinking and lack of regulation to things like healthcare or housing or medicine, then people will be priced out of that market. And if you're priced out of your insulin and you're diabetic, then you will be harmed if not face death.
Yeah.
So anything that is a basic human need cannot be treated under that same speculative consumer commodity market where some people will be priced out.
And unlike the claim that you sometimes hear that that's a, far left view, there's a physician, also political physician in Utah, Joe Jarvis, who is in favor of single payer health care, and he makes the conservative case for it, partly because it's more efficient in terms of where the money goes, the return on the investment. But he goes through a whole argument of explaining how patients are not customers. They are not consumers.
Correct.
If you break your leg, you're not going to be able to go on the internet and figure out which hospital can give you the best deal on fixing your leg. You just go where you can.
Or shop around. Right?
Yes, you can't shop around.
You can't shop around when you have, stage 4 breast cancer and treatment needs to start tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's not a reasonable approach to healthcare. It's not a reasonable approach to education either, which is why your local public school needs to be the best public school.
Yeah.
It needs to be the best school around. So everybody's local public school should be their top option because it is just as good as any other school that you might look into.
Now, on your, we're talking about money, and in your position papers that are available, online, you started out talking about the budget and quoting Martin Luther King about budgets being moral documents, and this is something. It's like really a big overlap with where the New London Greens have been for a long time. It's like your budget is the real place where you're stating your priorities. I mean, words are cheap, speeches are cheap.
Yes.
Where you put your money, that's what you value.
Correct.
So in terms of dealing with the state budget, and you already suggested, the problem with these fiscal guardrails, what would be your recommendation in terms of like what the state could do to make our budget a more moral document?
Well, one of the biggest things is the massive inequality that existed before the pandemic, grew exponentially during the pandemic, and has continued to grow since. So one of the fundamental, one of the biggest inequalities that exist are the difference between graduated, progressively increasing income tax, so that those who make the most, after $400,000 a year, after $1 million a year, then that's a higher percentage than somebody who's making less than $30,000 a year. And that needs to be balanced against what we have now, which is an over-reliance on local property tax to fund most of our services that most people rely on. And so it's the difference between a progressively increasing income tax on the very wealthy and on large corporations versus the regressive tax, which is a property tax, which hits and hurts those who make less harder.
Yeah.
And this has been studied as well, and the percentage of one's income that goes into state and local taxes in our state between those who are at the lower end and at the higher end is a giant gap. I believe after maybe $500,000 at the very top, it's only about 7% of your overall income that goes to taxes. At the lowest end, it's a much, much higher percentage of your overall income that you pay to taxes.
Yeah, and the higher your sales tax, of course, and the fewer exceptions there are for things like food or clothing,
or just
basic
your
needs.
property taxes, your sales taxes, any fees that are the same fee for everybody. These are inherently regressive, meaning it hits those who make less harder.
And if you, this is area of controversy in New London, but automobile taxes across the state are a real example of this, because unlike your home or your land, there's might be a little bit of adjustment in a way that towns with higher property tax rates, the land and the houses might be assessed a little bit lower to partly compensate. But for cars, they're valued the same whatever town you live in. So literally, people who own, fancy Beamers in I don't know, Fairfield County, New Canaan, or wherever, are paying less tax on their cars than people who are, driving, Toyotas or in New London.
Yeah, with a much higher mill rate, yes.
Yeah.
Another example of this would be an income tax that applies to Social Security and people living on a fixed income. That's also completely backwards. It makes no sense. You've already, in your working days, you already paid that tax on that income. People who are living on a fixed income, people who are living on Social Security, shouldn't have to pay further taxes on that Social Security. That's again, you've already paid for it while you were working.
And the other piece with Social Security, and you can't fix this at the state level, but on the national level.
But we can
fix. But the cutoff for I think that in our working years, Bob and I never made enough to reach the Social Security cutoff. So it's very regressive, because you only pay Social Security fees on, I don't know what the number is.
You're talking
it's
about,
maybe
it's
around $100,000 cap, something like that.
Yeah, it's not more than $200,000, which means.
Which has gone up quite a bit, because I remember when it was over 75,000 or 85.
Yes.
But that makes it regressive. Why isn't it the same percent? If not graduated, at least the same, with all your income.
Yeah, that would make sense. But yes, but that specifically is a federal level. What we can address at the state level is the income tax, the state income tax that would be collected or paid on Social Security. I don't think any state income tax should be collected on Social Security payments. And
now you've doubtless looked at the budget documents that Connecticut Voices for Children puts out, because they are very big on a more really graduated income tax, and also on increasing, the tax credit at the state level.
You mean the
or
child?
Yeah, or creating one at the state level.
Okay. Well, there are several different credits. There's.
Yeah, I think the child.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't even remember what the acronym is, but yes.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about, tax relief for people who are struggling and working?
Well, yeah, I mean, something like the child tax credit is exactly the policy that we need. And again, it's amazing looking back not very far during the pandemic. Again, this was a federal program, but we had an increased child tax credit that I believe reduced childhood poverty rates by over 40%, maybe over 50%. Again, that was a temporary measure, and since it's gone away, all that childhood poverty that was alleviated immediately came back the following year. So what really frustrates me, both as somebody who has organized outside of political office and why I ultimately decided to run for elected office, is that the solutions are actually relatively obvious and pretty simple, and when we do them, everybody sees the benefits. It is ultimately just a choice of our elected representatives to not continue to provide those things that actually do help people. So the answers are, in my opinion, quite obvious. We just need to choose to do them.
Yeah, during especially the first couple years of COVID, I was foolishly optimistic that people would see
Yeah.
that the funding of like COVID testing and vaccines, no one had to decide if they felt sick. Oh, do I have to skip lunch to afford a COVID test? It was all, you could just do it.
Correct.
And when you went to get the vaccination, you just did it. You didn't have to weigh it, like make a spot for it in your family budget. And I thought, oh, people will see how great like a universal healthcare system could be. And then it was all a dream.
I mean, what you're talking about in most of the rest of the world, and when we had it here, are very basic public health measures.
Absolutely.
And so I guess I would say it's not that people didn't see that or recognize, hey, this is much better than having to figure out whether I have to pay for it, how I have to pay for it, how I have to get it. Do I have to apply for it? Because that's the other giant benefit of, say, a universal program that's available to all. There's no application process. If you need it, you receive it. So people saw that. People who have kids in school saw that their kids went to school and they got fed a breakfast and lunch every day, right? The only issue that I see coming out of that is people don't necessarily connect that back to, oh, this person in this elected office made this decision, and that's why I no longer have this. So what I do often when I'm talking with people one-on-one, when I'm going door to door, is I'm making that connection. I'm saying, yeah, you saw the benefit of this. Or they say, hey, that was really helpful for me when I had that thing last year, when we had those basic public health measures in place last year. That helped me, that helped my kids, that helped my family. And then they don't connect it back to, but why did that go away? Who passed the law, or who wrote a law so that those types of things had an end date? So I really try to make it the connection that ultimately, yes, who you vote for, who gets elected in office, and the decisions that they make, and how they write the legislation, that's why you either have those support systems or you don't. So it's not just voting based on kind of who you like more on a personal level. It's also who's actually going to pass bills that actually help you and your family.
And talking about healthcare, Connecticut could really do something spectacular with healthcare, because we're one of the two or three states in the union that don't have privatized Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And I think it happened in the early Dan Malloy years that he took out the private gatekeepers from Medicaid. And health providers that I know say that Medicaid, Husky, is the easiest insurance to bill. They don't get denials. It saved money after Connecticut stopped outsourcing their risk, because it sounds great. Oh, let's outsource your risk. But the private companies that are taking it on, they're always going to charge you premiums high enough that they'll make money.
I mean, ultimately, they're a middleman who takes a cut between what you pay to them and the money that ultimately gets to your doctor, your healthcare provider. They're just a middleman taking a cut in a completely unnecessary step.
And so Connecticut did actually do something about it, and
so we can go a lot further. So, for instance,
we can.
What I'm thinking about is, I know a lot of people like to talk about how state workers have excellent health care benefits.
State retirees do too. I know that firsthand.
100%. And yeah, I would say that they do better than most people working in the private sector. But my response to that is, we don't need to take that away from them because they have something better. We need to expand that to include other workers and other people. And we have started that in ways that you just described, but in other ways, in terms of we opened up the state workers' healthcare plan to municipal workers,
Right.
and towns can choose whether or not to participate for their municipal employees. Well, if we can do that, if we can expand it to a different set of workers, then we can expand it to all workers.
Yeah, and we could
And there's
expand
no reason not to.
Husky to more people. You know, every year, every session, it seems, the Husky for Immigrants Coalition keeps trying to expand coverage to either undocumented immigrants or immigrants who haven't been here long enough
Sure.
to qualify. But even, I'd love to see, just federal legislation to make health care, the way it should be
Again,
overnight.
Yes, ultimately that is
But
the
but
answer.
incrementally, we could actually help a lot of people by expanding all these different things we have in place to cover more people.
But yes, ultimately it needs to be a nationwide federal effort, just like every other peer nation that has one form of another of a universal, single-payer public healthcare system that covers all of their citizens. But at the state level, we can make a lot of progress. I mean, even think of the Affordable Care Act and where that came from. It started in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts still has their version of it.
Oh yeah,
And
I
we
always
could
called
have-
it Romney Care.
I mean, we could have our version of it in a way that
could.
our sustenance system, we could expand in the
Yeah.
ways that I just described. And then everybody who wants to talk about how state workers have things that are not available to them, well, again, my answer is it should
Bring
be
'em in.
It should be available to you as well.
Yeah, we don't want people to suffer more, and even the state workers. Well, my own little gripe is that for state retirees, they do roll your Medicare into the state plan, and about 4 years ago they switched everyone over to a Medicare Advantage plan out of traditional Medicare, and there are some bills at the federal level to force states to allow people to remain in the traditional Medicare if they want to. So, to me, the coverage at the individual level isn't really different because the state insurance provides the gap. But I hate to see the private pool getting bigger and bigger in healthcare, which should be a public good, not a private profit point.
Well, now we're getting to another point, which affects any number of different issue areas, including, of course, healthcare, costs of prescriptions, which is money in politics. We live in, quote unquote, the insurance state, right?
Yeah.
And they have a lot of influence, and they spend a lot of money lobbying, of course, at the federal level, but yes, at the state level as well.
They do.
And that obviously, ask anybody, that obviously influences and affects our politicians and our politics. And for me, you want to make progress on healthcare, protecting the environment, public services in general. You got to get money out of the process, because ultimately, if the money is part of the process, then those with the most will always be able to buy influence. And we can't have lawmakers elected into office who just serve those who put the most money into their campaign. Now, there are ways in which we have started to combat that influence. We have a public financing system for the state of Connecticut, which for candidates running for state office.
Yeah.
Right now it's optional, and I am choosing to participate in that because it is so important to get money out of politics. But one way we could expand that at the state level is we can make that mandatory, that anybody running for state office must participate in public financing and cannot take any private, lobbyist, corporate contributions.
And of course, open it up a little easier
Of
to
course.
non-major parties.
Yes.
Yeah, the money at all levels, you see it from
Yes.
town level up
Correct.
to federal.
Yes.
So, and it does influence policy. Well, I'm seeing time is going.
Yeah.
We don't have to really wrap it up or anything, but
In just one more, in housing as well, you talk about real estate interests,
Oh, yeah.
especially how real estate companies are becoming more corporatized and are backed by venture funds and others who are seeking a massive return on investment. That money also influences our politics and our politicians.
And I want to just remind people that at least for New London, and it might be for all towns, I'm not sure. 2024 is one of the years that our city council has to renew the City and Town Development Act, which allows our town to give tax abatements to developers. And I'm not telling people we shouldn't renew it. I'm not sure about that, but I think we really need to think about who we choose to give abatements to, and when are we getting a good return on investment and when we're not. Because, we learned with Pfizer, when they had to start paying taxes, they pulled up their stakes. So I think we need to be a little more thoughtful about that. I did want to have a chance, though, to talk about environmental issues, because we're shoreline area, and we're not like we lived in Oregon for several years, and like the whole coastline is public in Oregon up to 16 feet
That's right.
above the mean high tide mark. That is not the case in Connecticut.
Sure. Yeah.
So we tend to not just put residences like near the shoreline. We put some big industrial thing. New London has a transfer station. Waterford has Millstone. So what are your thoughts on what we can do to respond to and survive climate change?
I mean, it's not something that can easily be addressed at the local level. At the local level, we have to build resiliency. We have to, maybe pass local ordinances on things like runoff that might go into our local waterways, into the Long Island Sound. So locally, and of course, I think every municipal building should have a solar panel on its roof, should have a geothermal well dug for heat, use heat pumps, and so we can make some progress locally, but at the same time, you need support and you need policy change at the state and federal level, and you need financial support as well, because we know what the solution is. We know we have to stop using fossil fuel and expanding natural gas and other fossil fuels. But at the same time, we can't say to our towns, and certainly not to our residents, individual residents, that all the cost has to be on them individually, because that's just not sustainable for anybody. So throughout our country's history, we have made giant public investments to promote or go in one direction or another. The reason that we have an interstate highway system is because of heavy public investment. That was a choice we made. Ultimately, I think that was the wrong choice to promote individual car use as opposed to, say, public transportation. But we can make a choice in a different direction. We can choose to heavily invest and support towns when they do want to move away from fossil fuel use locally, and when new construction goes up, or when rehab is done on existing municipal buildings, so that they can incorporate solar and heat pumps and geothermal. So it's a collective effort, but it does need to be supported at the state and, of course, federal levels.
Now, Waterford did do a pretty good job when they rehabbed their schools.
Correct, yes. In again, I'll go back to it once again, which is the solutions are there. They're literally in place in our town. I believe 4 out of our 5 public schools have geothermal for heating and use heat pumps. But at the same time, Town Hall has no solar, not one single solar panel on its roof. So it's confusing and frustrating to say, yeah, but the solution is right there. It's already in use. We're already doing it.
And it's
then
already in use in our town.
in our town, so why not have it in use for the building literally right next door that is also a town building? So,
Things aren't always
again, I'll
logical.
come back to it, which is ultimately it's a choice. And it doesn't need to be an ideological one. Again, you talk about our schools. You know, we're right in the middle of our town's yearly budget process. Me as the member of the RTM, we're going to be reviewing our Board of Ed budget and our town's budget for the year starting in May. And I've attended the Board of Ed budget meetings this year and my entire time on the RTM. And one of the things that they highlight every single budget year is the hundreds of thousands of dollars that our Board of Ed and our Waterford Public Schools saves because we have geothermal heat. And because once you dig that well, once you set it up, there is no additional fuel cost. It's a little bit of a higher upfront cost, but after 10 to 15 years, everything after that is complete savings. So every single year, we have our Board of Ed and our school administrators and superintendent and finance director talking about, look at all this money we're saving by going green in using sustainable energy infrastructure. And then on the town side, we're not implementing that, and we're just choosing not to save literally hundreds of thousands of dollars every single year.
And I'm thinking, one other side of the practical part of this is jobs. It seems as though, the technology jobs in Connecticut are to a great extent tied with the military, which is maybe not in my view, it's not the best return on it. We're personally more likely to see damage from, hurricanes, from climate change than,
Yes. But at the same time, yes, that's of course a big sector in our state, but at the same time, a big and growing sector in our state are all those windmills being constructed and
in New London,
put together, right, and launched right from New London. And what's also really important and relevant to that that issue and the intersection of climate and jobs is, I've participated, again, as a labor organizer in the roundtable on climate and jobs, which specifically brings together climate activists, environmental activists, and labor, organized labor, to make sure that both benefit together, that it's a win-win for everybody. So all of those wind turbines that are being set up and built and put together in New London, those are all good union jobs. And everybody can win, as long as we make that choice.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so maybe with your last 3 minutes, tell people how they can find out more about your campaign. Do you have any, events coming up, or anyway, let people know.
Well, again, directly from my campaign, so we have our website, nickgauthierct.com. Of course, anybody can contact me directly and personally. You can give me a call, 860-287-0991. Because it's still so early, we actually did qualify for our public financing. We haven't received the grant yet, but once we receive that, then from here until November, I personally, and our campaign overall with our volunteers, are going to be out knocking doors, ideally at least 10,000 doors across Waterford and Montville. So if you go to our website, you send me an email, send me a text, you'd like to participate and volunteer for our campaign, that's number one, which is door-to-door canvassing. So we don't have a specific event yet, but once conventions happen in May and we're officially the endorsed candidate for the November ballot, then I anticipate with me, with Senator Martha Marks for the state Senate, because our districts overlap, with the Waterford Democrats, with the Montville Democrats, and Green members, of course, as well, are welcome, that we're going to be getting together to organize ourselves.
And in the last minute, do you see any difference in the Waterford voting public that makes you hopeful?
Difference from what?
Well, from 2 years ago when you were down by 200 votes.
It's not necessarily that it's a massive change. Again, a lot of those needs are still out there. It's that I always run every election, even though, say, last year for the municipal, it was my third time running. I run it like it's my first time running, like I need to work my tail off to get to every single voter. And I will do exactly the same this time, but obviously I'll be starting with a higher floor and in that recognition. So it really is building a bigger team. I guess the biggest change is more people are paying attention, more people want to organize, and more people are recognizing that we can make different choices and that you do have somebody who you can vote for who's going to really work hard day in and day out for you.
Well, thank you, Nick, and good luck. And nickgauthierct.com is the website, correct? And next week, I actually don't know who my guest is going to be, but I'm working on getting someone who can give us an update on what's happening in the Middle East. There's a big rally in New Haven on the 28th, and events are moving pretty fast there right now. And the last show we did was late February, so I don't know who it'll be, but that might be the topic, and we'll see you then. And thank you again, Nick.
Thank you.
When the rain don't